Welcome. I'm Cheryl Mitchell from Treleven, which is a retreat and learning center located on a farm out here in Addison County. And we really are focusing on issues of spirit, nature, and social justice. So it's my great privilege today to have two guests who have lived in this community for a long time. Erin Ruble is actually on the Treleven board, so I'm thrilled that you're here, Erin. And Barbara Clearbridge, I've gotten to know through the Quaker meeting and through other work in town. We're going to talk mostly about the restorative justice program in the county and how the two of you came to be involved in it and what's involved. But then I'd also like to just explore a little bit why you came to live in Addison County, what your experiences have been here, maybe what your hopes for the county are. So I'll start maybe with Barbara Clearbridge. And excuse my hesitation, I have known Barbara by her nickname for a long time, and I may slip from time to time. But Barbara, maybe you could give us just an overview about what is restorative justice.
Okay, it's part of the Department of Corrections, and it's a way to give people an alternative to incarceration. So there's different ranges of it, but in general, the state's attorney or a judge, instead of sending someone to prison, can send them to restorative justice program. And we, with the person, we would look at what harm was done, who was harmed, why it happened, and how to restore what was taken by whatever happened. And the restoration includes the person who did it, why they did it and what they lost, and what they need in order not to reoffend. So the idea is for a community and cooperative and restorative way rather than a punitive way of handling crime.
Mm-hmm. I sort of remember, I didn't realize that it was 40 years old until you told me that earlier, but that it was a sea change in thinking about our interactions with things that go wrong in our community, and especially people who do things that are outside the law in our community. And instead of saying, let's find out who did it, let's get them and punish them, it was, let's find out what went on here, help that person so that they're not going to offend again, but also to repair the harm that was done to the victims or to the community. And you're a lawyer, right? Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about, is this typical law? Is this different from the way the law usually looks at people who have offended?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, the criminal justice system has struggled with, there are a whole lot of different components to sort of how you deal with crime. There's punishment and deterrence, and there's also rehabilitation and restoration. So kind of all of the things that Barbara's been talking about. But the emphasis really changes depending on kind of the political will and what's happening in society. And so you kind of see this sine wave in the criminal justice system for how much any one of those factors is in the ascendancy. And obviously it also varies depending on the crime and the people involved. So this kind of process is not chosen for every crime and shouldn't be chosen for every crime. But I first actually got interested in this kind of thing in law school because there are different systems. I took an Indian law class, and it was talking about, I remember reading a case with this Dakota tribe in South Dakota that was, the Lakota tribe in South Dakota, who was really looking at crime, a serious crime of murder, from a restorative perspective.
Wow.
And it had a completely different perspective of this person has stepped outside of the norms of the community, and how do we bring them back, and how do we repair the harm to the extent that it can be for the family. And it was this totally radically different understanding, and community courts after the Rwanda genocide had to come over and sort of take on the burden of dealing with some of the genocidal harm, and they were applying this sort of restorative system. And so it's been something I've kind of been interested in for a long time, of how you can address these sometimes very serious issues, sometimes much less serious issues, but in a way that really supports the community and the victims, so nobody feels like somebody's getting off or gaming the system, but also in a way that brings the offender back into the fold and helps them sort of come back. And I think that that's something that good prosecutors and judges are trying very hard to do a lot of the time, but they aren't always given the tools to do it, because sometimes you have, especially, every state has its own system, and the federal justice system has its own system of laws, but sometimes those can be kind of strict, and so they don't have a lot of choices all the time in terms of,
like the 3 strikes and you're out. Sort of
exactly.
thing.
So a judge, when they get to the sentencing position, might not be able to depart downward from, for instance, the federal sentencing guidelines. And so I just think it's great to have more tools at everybody's disposal to try to apply these things when it's helpful.
Barbara, maybe you could describe what do you do? What is this toolkit?
Okay, but let me just add something first.
Yeah.
There's another part of the court diversion program which helps people who have been incarcerated once they come out, which is really important. So they're not just coming out cold and trying to fit and be different than they were before they went in. So that's another aspect I really like.
Is that the COSA, the Circles of Support and
That's
Accountability?
one of them,
part?
yes.
That's one of them.
Yeah.
Because, yes, we've heard that that's often a huge problem for people once you come back, and people don't want to give you a job, although there's been some nice coverage in the paper about employers around our county who have really said, we know it's important for people to have a job.
Yeah, but
I'll employ you.
to help them keep a job and
Right.
come back into the community.
Yeah.
So
And I would just jump in and as well, I think that's one thing that the legal system is not very good at, is trying to get at the root causes of what happened and help people find a way to avoid that problem in the future. I mean, that's just something that really they haven't taken on, can't take on. But it is something that we deal with all the time in our panels. And so Barbara was talking about looking at the participant in a way as one of the people who is adversely affected. Often they are hugely adversely affected. If they run a car into the tree, they may be dealing with back problems for the next 5 years. They may lose their license and lose their job. And so talking about how they got to that position and how they can avoid it in the future, and that is a huge part of what we do. And that, I think, is tremendously valuable, because that helps them in the future, and it helps everybody, because then we're not having the same kind of reoffense. And there is a huge decrease in recidivism for participants, I believe.
yes.
Yeah, I've just
very
heard that
effective.
the outcomes are fantastic compared to just the straight put you in jail and lock you up. So maybe you'll tell me,
What do we do?
what do you do? What is a panel? What happens?
Well, first of all, there is some training. We're volunteers, but there is training for us. And there's things that happen before they get to us with the director of the program, where they have to think about what they did and why they did it and who was impacted and all of that. But we end up we see a police report, and sometimes we get some information about what went on between the director of the program and the person ahead of time. And a panel is, we like it to be 3 or 4 people. And our job is to represent the community in what happened. And then the person comes to see us, and we say, what happened? And they tell us what happened, and we might ask them, why do you think you did that? Or what was going through your mind, or what? And we try and see why, what happened. It would almost be easier to explain if we make a hypothetical client.
Would you be willing to do that? I know you can't talk about any real cases, but
I can make somebody up. All right, so let's say we had somebody who was coming home late at night, had been to work, had picked up a child, and went to the grocery store and drove into a mailbox. How's that? Because they were too tired. So we look at why were you too tired? What happened? Who was affected? And then one of the goals of the program is for the person to take responsibility for what happened. And this can be a big sticking point. It wasn't my fault. That other person did this, and they did that, and my boss did this. So, and there's no change that comes from that.
Yeah.
So we want them to say, yes, I shouldn't have been driving so tired, or I shouldn't have had my child in the car with me, or I shouldn't have been, leaning over to pick up my phone, or whatever it was. And then we look at consequences, not only the consequences that happened, but what might have happened. Like, let's say this person was speeding with a child in the car. Well, what would have happened if you'd hit a tree at that speed? What would have happened to your child? And we try and help them see the consequences of what happened. And sometimes people get road rage. And we try and look at how they can manage that. So our goal is to come up with a contract where they will take certain steps to repair the damage that was done, and to, if they need to take control over some part of their own behavior for the future. And then they have 3 months generally to do those things, and then they come back and they share them with us.
And what's it like when people come back? Are they usually different than the...
It is remarkable, because often the things that we ask them to do are actually not that involved, and you would think that it would be very easy to sort of do a pat answer and come back, but you can really tell as a panel whether somebody's taking it seriously or not. And people choose to participate in the program, and if they give it a good effort, then that's great. And if they don't, then we do have the option of saying, well, this clearly is not happening. And there are occasionally cases where people are just not willing to do the work, basically. But I would say in the great majority of cases, there is a huge, some people come in already feeling terrible about what happened, and there's really nothing much that we have to do. But particularly if they had a lot of consequences that happened in their own lives, they lost their license, they had physical issues, they might have had problems with their relationships. So, there's not really a lot that you really have to hammer home about what the consequences were. But there are a number of cases where somebody comes in very defensive, very resistant. They almost always say, well, yeah, this was a stupid thing I did, but my ex-wife or my job, or I didn't have the money and so I had to steal. I didn't, So then you get, and often people are going through really hard times, and so, part of our job is to sort of help people figure out what the resources are in their own lives and in the community for how they can get what they need so that they aren't in these desperate circumstances. In your example, maybe she had to take on all these extra shifts because she didn't have enough food for her daughter. So then you start saying, well,
there's a food shelf.
There's a
Some
food shelf.
People don't know at all what help there is.
So when you are there as representatives of the community, it's also expected that you'll know something about what else is available.
Well, somebody knows. I don't think you need to know everything at your fingertips, but
amongst the people on the panel, generally we have some good ideas. And if a person doesn't fulfill their contract, then they'll go back to the judge and they will get sentenced. So it's
so if people fulfill their contract, then it doesn't show up on their record.
That
or
depends
is it only
on
if they're
that depends on their presentation in the system.
I see.
If it's pre-diversion, then I believe it's
expunged.
It's expunged, and if it's not, then it's they still went through had the criminal conviction, but they don't get sentenced to jail time, or they might have a reduced sentence.
So should we tell you some of the things that go in contracts? Would that be interesting?
You could tell me one or two things. That would be great, and then I'd love to find out more personally about why each of you have chosen. It's a commitment, right?
It's not that big. To sit on a panel is only a few hours a month. But some of them are much greater.
Yeah.
This is not that much.
Okay. So
the COSA is more intensive. There are different panels.
They're meeting every week or more than once a week as people need them.
Okay. So tell me, let's say it was the person who was tired and drove. What might be in that contract?
Well, if there's a child in the car, we often ask them to write the child's obituary as if they had died. It's very impactful. Or if someone else is in the car, who you might have killed. Or if you died, sometimes we ask people to write their own obituary. And it's very powerful. Or they don't realize, they're giving somebody the finger and it doesn't mean anything to them, but to me it does. And they say, well, if that happens to me, so they begin to see what their effect is on other people. we've said, all right, go, do some research online, if they're an online person, and find ways to manage anger, and bring us a list of the 20 you like the best, and then pick 3 that you would like to try. So they're learning then what to do about anger. Or we had one person who committed a crime because they had a family member who said, come along, I need someone to drive. And that person went to commit the crime, and so the other family member was with them. So somebody on the panel had that sort of relationship with their own brother and worked with them. How do you say no in that circumstance? So there's life skills people don't have. And there's also self-esteem people don't have. And they come in expecting us to be judgmental and severe, and what we end up doing is trying to help them find their self-esteem. And
it's really about coming to a plan that emerges from the conversation jointly. It's not about us imposing something on someone. We're not coming saying, well, you screwed up, so here are the things you have to do. It's really about, okay, well, how did this happen? Can you reflect more on this? What do you think about that? And it's an outgrowth of the conversation. It might be talk about who has supported you in this. If she lost her license after she ran into the mailbox, is there somebody who has been picking up the slack for her and driving her and her child? And write a letter of appreciation to that person. Think about all of the people. We focus a lot on who is supporting them and how to strengthen those relationships and how to appreciate that.
That sounds wonderful. And you had mentioned that you came to it, when you were in law school, you studied a little bit about how the Lakota people dealt with this, so this concept was interesting to you. When you got here to Addison County, you weren't in law school in Addison County, right?
No, in Texas.
In Texas. Okay. So what brought you here, and how did you find out that you could be on this board?
My husband was born and raised in Vermont, and so he wanted to come back here and start a family here. So we came, and I was in private practice here for a while, and now I actually work for an attorney back in Texas doing some criminal defense, mostly immigration, and have been doing that sort of long distance for a number of years now. And then a few years ago, I heard about the program actually from somebody who was working on one of the COSA panels over in the Upper Valley. She lives in New Hampshire, but she was working on a Vermont panel, and thought it sounded amazing. And then I think you brought the information to Quaker Meeting saying that they were looking for volunteers for panels in this county a couple of years ago, and I was. So I already knew about the program and how great it was from this other woman, and so I was excited to hear about it.
And so you connected locally when you were here?
And there is a pretty extensive training process, and that was really valuable, and actually fits in really well with sort of, I guess, revolutions and ideas of child rearing as well. I have 2 little kids, and so thinking more about, you don't punish kids, you sort of help them understand, not to say that participants are children at all, but I mean, it's true for us too. I mean, for everybody, like, everybody makes mistakes, and figuring out how to solve that and do better in the future is so much more productive than pointing fingers. And I just wanted to sort of close the loop to say that, after you do these things, like people come back, and sometimes it takes a few times, but there's usually a huge change in affect and understanding, and it's just really tremendous. It's like, you ask them to write a few paragraphs about a few things, and it creates this whole chain of thought that then really can change people's outlook.
Or we ask for
really
the future. Where do you want your life to go? And they have to think about that, and then we help them figure out how to make that happen. It's great.
So how you came from Chicago initially? How did you end
sort
up here?
of. I needed to relocate closer to Chicago, and I everybody said Vermont's great, so I came over to look at it, and it was great. So, so then I drove around the state, and I picked the warmest part of Vermont where I thought I could live. And then I looked at the Quaker meetings, and I liked Middlebury. So I lived in the state, I think, took 3 years before I could actually be in Middlebury. And I think I saw a United Way posting for volunteers.
That's how you found out about it. So we will actually show the contact information for people that are watching at the end. And we're going to run out of time, which is unfortunate. But you're both also creative artists, and I'm wondering if you might just address a little bit about how that part of you, the creativity, you with song and you with writing, is there any connection between what you're doing here with social justice work and the creative part of
Well,
your
with
life?
me there is, because the musical group I'm putting together now called Heaven Song is about bridge building and community building and about finding what we have in common and lifting ourselves. So that I would say yes.
Yeah. And how about for you, Erin?
I guess there's a common sense of discernment, of trying to figure out what's going on beneath the surface and understanding kind of truth in situations. So you don't just look at an episode and say, well, this is what happened. It's like, well, why did it happen and how did it come to be and who is this person and what's going on in her life? And that's kind of a similar process of writing essays to tease out a situation or writing a story that has a character who is going through things. It's sort of the same kinds of questions, I guess.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. I'm really appreciative that both of you took the time to come and do this. I know you have to pick up kids, you have many other things to do, but I feel as if we're so lucky in this community that people like you do get involved. It gives to me, gives a sense of hopefulness that just as individuals can make these changes with the kind of support that you're doing, maybe our communities will keep getting better and better. But
well,
anyway.
I think that's what's great about this community, is that it's full of people helping each other.
And your program, too.
Thanks. Well, and I would just say, for any of you that are watching, if you also have issues that you would like to talk about, the people here at the community television station are unbelievable, and all you have to do is call them up and say, hey, I'd like to explore this. They support nonprofit groups in really getting a message out or helping a dialogue to begin. So thanks for watching today, and please give them a call if you'd like to do a show.